great industrialist Henry Ford once said, "If you want to succeed in life, simply form early on the habit of doing the things that failures don't like to do." Forming the habit of doing the things that failures don't like to do. This is something of what I'd like to talk about today. This morning, as our study of Moses and the Exodus continues, the Israelites are still at Mount Sinai, forming the covenant that will join them to God as God's holy people. And in our reading today, they have just received the Ten Commandments, and Moses has gone up the mountain to sort of, complete the deal, to receive the rest of the law. Now, the agreement, the covenant God and the people are forming seems like a pretty sweet deal. I mean, God agrees to be their God, to care for them and to provide for them and to love them. And the people need only agree to be God's people in return. It's a great deal, obviously the sweet deal that God has offered to all of us. But before the ink is even dry on the contract, the people begin to break the agreement. Having just received the Ten Commandments and having unanimously agreed to them, they proceed to break most of them, most notably the first two. They make for themselves an idol, and then they bow down in perverse worship to it. Needless to say, God is not amused, but fortunately Moses intercedes. Now, looking from the outside at this famous scene, the story of the golden calf, it's easy for us to ridicule, to point fingers at the people's, their fickleness and their failure, particularly at how quickly and how seemingly without concern the people turn from God and they do wrong. You just think about how often we all pledge ourselves to God one moment and then almost in the same breath break the vow, right? This is a very human scene. And in this, notice the even deeper truth that's demonstrated here. Here God is trying to do a great thing for the people, to make their lives fantastic, yet the people almost wipe this out. They crash and burn, quickly sabotaging the great life that God is trying to give them. The people make a number of classic mistakes that get them in trouble with God, or even more specifically, that get their lives going away from the goodness that God is trying to give to them. Now, they may not have known that they were doing this. They may not have been aware of the seriousness of their actions right in the moment, but it drives a wedge between them and God nonetheless, and it hinders the life that they are being offered. And I believe that is the point for us today. That what this text illustrates are some of the classic ways we all, quite often unknowingly, drive a wedge between ourselves and the life that God is offering to us. Behaviors we're not aware of in the moment, but that we need to become conscious of and actively resist. And this being what I'd like to focus on here. And I'd like to organize my thoughts this way. Perhaps you recall, from about a generation ago or so, there were a number of best-selling books, with titles like, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, or the 8 Secrets of the World's Most Successful People, that kind of thing, Well, our topic today is sort of the inverse of this. Drawing from the example of the Israelites here, what I'd like to offer today is the 5 secrets of highly unsuccessful people, or the behaviors we all need to watch out for because they will keep us from God's best for our lives. The 5 secrets of highly unsuccessful people. Secret number 1, be impatient. This, of course, is what sets today's drama in motion, is impatience. Moses has gone up the mountain, and as it says in the text, he was delayed, right? Now, we don't know exactly what is meant by this. I mean, how do they know that Moses is delayed? I mean, did Moses say, I'll be back in 15 minutes, set your watches, right? No, I don't think so, right? The word delayed implies a time limit that has been exceeded. Had they set a time limit on this? How do you set a time limit on communing with the Lord and receiving the covenant? I mean, let's face it, God is going to decide how long this takes. But you see, this is exactly the first point. Moses is not delayed. He's taking exactly the amount of time that is required. He's only delayed in the sense of the people's expectations and how long they think this should take. And this, of course, represents their first fundamental problem. They insist on their time and not God's time, and it sets off all the trouble that follows. Same with us. This is the first classic mistake that the Israelites make and that we also so often make. We are impatient, right? We don't give God time in our lives, time in the lives of others, and thus we miss out on what God is so often up to. We decide how long things must and should take. Everything's got to be on our schedule, right? But life just doesn't work that way. A noted scholar writes, a generation of Christians reared among push buttons and automatic machines is impatient of slower and less direct methods of reaching their goals. We have been trying to apply machine-age methods to our relations with God. We read our chapter, we have our short devotions, and then rush away, hoping to make up for our deep inward bankruptcy by attending just another church meeting. The tragic results of this spirit are all about us. Shallow lives, hollow religious philosophies, spiritless lives. These and such as these are the symptoms of an evil disease, a deep and serious malady of the soul. The problem is that in this country, you can have what you want when you want it most of the time. People like the fact that they can go out and buy a 50-foot tree and instantly plant it in the Lord. Decades of growth in an instant. Why on earth would anyone want to wait for God? Why on earth would anybody want to wait for God, right? Have you ever heard the story of the two women who were walking home from church one Sunday afternoon? The first woman remarked to her friend, "Boy, that was a great sermon today on patience." To which her friend replied, "Yeah, but it went on about 5 minutes too long." Right? Sound about right? I remember once hearing someone say that the way that we all tend to pray is like a child ringing someone's doorbell and then running away, right? We make our request, but then we run off before we can get the answer, right? We are so frantically blasting through life that we're never there to see God answer the door, right? First lesson here, give God time. Very simply, in your life, every day, force yourself at some point to stop and to breathe, to sit down, to look around, to listen, and to simply be. Trust me, odds are you will find this the hardest thing in your day to do, right? And that's how you know it's the most important, right? Quit making life happen and let it happen. Let it come to you, You'd be amazed at what comes your way when you quit pushing for it. Just stop for a moment, right? First secret of highly unsuccessful people, be impatient. Second secret, believe the worst. As noted from the people's perspective, Moses is delayed up the mountain. And while he is delayed, notice what the people are thinking. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered around Aaron and said to him, "Come, make gods for us, who shall go before us. As for this Moses, this man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." Notice what's running through their minds. They're imagining the worst. We don't know what's become of Moses, this guy, They're not thinking that anything good can possibly be coming from this extra time with God. They're only thinking, Moses has got to be dead. It's all over. It's hopeless, right? Second, tragic flaw that gets them in trouble and moves God's good away from them. They assume the worst. They're thinking only bad, right? Once again, how often do we do the same? How often do we imagine only bad things? Failure, tragedy, difficulty, hardship, not opportunity and fortune and blessing. Have you ever noticed how when you're suddenly confronted with some obstacle or hardship, your mind immediately starts running through all the worst possible outcomes, all the doomsday scenarios, right? Or have you ever noticed how whenever someone comes up with some new great idea or plan, most especially in the church, the first thing that we all do, and it seems so easy to do, is to find fault with the idea, right? List all the ways and the reasons why it can't work, and it'll never happen, right? It seems to be a basic, almost automatic human response to assume the worst. Yet let us understand, it is a basic human response that we have got to resist. We must resist this. This because such things so often become a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? That is, we get only what we're looking for. Often the good God has for us is right nearby, but we can't receive it because we refuse to look at it. We're looking the other way, We have to be looking for it to find it. One author puts it this way. He writes, "It is said that two kinds of birds fly over the California deserts, the hummingbird and the vulture. All the vulture can see is rotting meat, because that is all he looks for and all he wants to look for. He thrives on that diet. But the hummingbird ignores the carcasses and the smelly flesh of the dead. Instead, he looks for the tiny blossom of the cactus flowers. He buzzes around until he finds the colorful blooms almost hidden from view by the rocks. Each bird gets what it is looking for." Each bird gets what it's looking for, right? Which are we? Hummingbirds or vultures, right? Make no mistake, the true Christian does not think the worst. That the true Christian rightly always thinks the absolute best. Why? Because they know the power and love of Jesus Christ in their hearts, right? Now, this doesn't mean that we don't face up to acknowledge a painful situation. It's only that in every situation, the Christian knows that the grace of God can do something amazing there, and they look more for that. They look for the blessing and the gift in each situation, even in hard times, tough times, looking, say, for some new friendship that arises, or some new calling to ministry, or some new insight, or new spiritual strength, something that's there through Jesus Christ, you know? Is this us? What are we looking for in each day, in each person, in each situation? Have you ever heard I hesitate to do this, really bad old joke about the family that had twin boys whose only resemblance to each other was their looks? If one felt it was too hot, the other thought it was too cold. If one said the TV was too loud, the other claimed the volume needed to be turned up. Opposites in every way. One was an eternal optimist, the other a doom and gloom pessimist, right? Just to see what would happen, on the twins' birthday, the father loaded the pessimist's room with every imaginable toy and game, right? The optimist's room, he loaded waist deep with horse manure, right? That night, the father passed by the pessimist's room and found him sitting amid all his new gifts, and he was crying bitterly. Why are you crying? The father asked. Well, because my friends are going to be jealous, and I'll have to read all these instructions before I can play with this stuff, and constantly going to need new batteries all the time, and all my toys are eventually just going to get broken, right? Answered the pessimist. Passing the optimist twins' room, the father found him dancing for joy deep in the pile of manure. Right? What are you so happy about? He asked. To which the optimist twin replied, are you kidding? With all of this manure, there's just got to be a pony in here somewhere, right? You know? In a similar way, no matter how deep in it the Christian finds themselves, they always expect something good. There's just got to be a pony in here somewhere, right? You know? And why? Because we know that God is on our side and wants only good for us, you know? True Christian lives this, and they refuse anything else. What are we looking for? Secret number 2 to blocking any good from your life: believe the worst. Which leads us into secret number 3, never bend. You know, continuing on, looking on, down in anger upon the people sinning below, God says this. The Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, how stiff-necked they are. You know, this is one of God's repeated comments regarding the Israelites throughout the whole story. One of God's repeated annoyances, how stiff-necked they are. Now, we've all had, like a stiff neck at one time or another, right? You know, like say those mornings when you wake up and somehow you slept in some kind of an awkward position or something. It really hurts, doesn't it? Right? Well, beyond the pain, what does a stiff neck do to you? Well, it limits your range of movement. You can't move properly. You become kind of like a Frankenstein, you know? You ever had that when you try to back the car out, your neck's all stiff, and you go, well, I hope nothing's there. I don't care, you know? It limits your movement. And this is what God means here. That this is one of the things that is really annoying God about these people, hindering the relationship between the two. The people's limited range of movement. That is, they have no flexibility, no give. God is trying to do great things for them, but they just won't bend. They won't change and grow and move. They're so stubborn, so stuck in their ways and in their thoughts, and thus they're sabotaging God's goodness. Once again, how about ourselves? How often are we inflexible, unyielding, and stubborn, and thus God can do nothing for us? Either refusing life when it doesn't go the way we want, and thus missing out on what we're being offered where it is, or refusing to ever repent and really change our ways when the path we have chosen is clearly wrong and is just not working, right? We won't try a new idea. We won't think a new thought. We won't compromise. We won't repent. We won't forgive. We won't apologize. We're not open to correction. You know, there's a traditional prayer from Kenya that goes like this. From the cowardice that dares not face new truth, from the laziness that is content with half-truth, and from the arrogance that thinks it knows all truth, good Lord, deliver me. Translation, Lord, keep me open and flexible. What's one of the best things, that you can do for your physical fitness? Think about it. What's one of the best things you're always told to do? It's stretching, right? It's working on your flexibility, right? Well, the same thing applies spiritually. How might we give a little bit this week, bend a little bit for the Lord, and find God? How are we being a little stiff and resistant, and it's keeping us from how God's trying to help us out and to keep us out of trouble? Newsman Dan Rather, he tells a story of an elevator ride he once took in a large Florida hotel, and he writes, "After having flown in late during the night, I am now up early to go downstairs and make a speech before several thousand people. I am not in a good mood. I'm stressed out, everything has been going wrong, and in the elevator I feel all eyes on me. Didn't any of these people's mothers teach them that it's rude to stare, I think? Soon the elevator reaches the lobby. As it empties, a woman gently takes hold of my sleeve. 'Mr. Rather,' she says quietly, I don't mean to intrude.' 'Well, then why are you intruding?' I say tersely. She looks around, makes sure no one else is listening, and she just says, I just don't want this to be embarrassing, but your fly is unzipped, and the shirt tail's sticking out, She just smiles and walks away. Says Rather, I was so bugged with her while she was just looking after me. How often is life like that? How often are we like that? We're all bugged. God's just looking after us, right? How are we fighting how God is trying to help us out every day? We're resisting, refusing correction and insight and change. Secret number 3 of failure in life, never bend. Which brings us to secret number 4, make your own God. This, of course, is what the whole scene is ultimately about. It's idolatry. The people make for themselves a statue. It's a graven image, which they then worship. A calf, being a traditional image of life and fertility and blessing. It's used by many ancient cultures. Now, of course, in this one, most of us would probably say, well, here, Pastor, I'm good. Haven't made any graven images lately, Not bowing down to any little statues in my room or anything. I trust we're all good on that one, right? But you see, in reality, this is exactly what makes this one so dangerous, because it's subtle and insidious. Basically, what happens here is this. The people find God, they basically find God too big, too challenging, too mysterious, too demanding. So they decide instead to create their own God, small and simple and visible and manageable. And with this, the whole thing falls apart. And that's the point. The people construct and then worship a God who essentially asks nothing of them, but who also thus can and will do nothing for them. But that seems a fair bargain for them. The question being, once again, is it the same bargain that we are seeking? Make no mistake, if we want the fullness of the life God is offering us, then we have to be willing to take on the fullness of the real God who alone can offer that life to us, a God deeply challenging and mysterious and demanding, right? Simply put, the next question here is, are we seeking a God of our own making who never asks anything truly upsetting of us, or are we seeking the true God who is regularly going to ask great, big, crazy, difficult, challenging things of us? Or perhaps, even more plainly stated, each on a personal level, what really tough thing is God asking of me today? And will I obey that and find life, or disobey and lose out? Noted Christian author writes, when I was growing up, I do not recall ever hearing the words, I love you, from my father. When your father never says them to you when you're a child, it's tough, and it gets tougher and tougher for him to even say those words as he gets older. And to tell the truth, I could not honestly remember when I had actually said those words to him either. But lately I had felt God leaning on me to tell my father that I loved him, that somehow I really needed to do this. It's important. So after much avoidance and delay, I finally decided to set my ego aside and to make the first move. After much hesitation in our next telephone conversation, I blurted out the words, Dad, I love you. And there was silence at the other end as he awkwardly replied, well, same back at you. I chuckled and I said, Dad, I know you love me, and when you're ready, you'll find the right words. 15 minutes later, my mother called and nervously asked, is everything okay? A few weeks later, my dad and I were talking again on the phone, and at the end of the conversation, after I said goodbye, there was this long silence, and then my dad suddenly whispered, Son, I love you. I was at work during this conversation, and the tears began rolling down my cheeks as I finally heard the love. As we both sat there in tears, we realized that this special moment had taken our father-son relationship to a whole deeper level. A short while after this special moment, my father just narrowly escaped death following heart surgery. Many times since, I have pondered the thought, if I did not take the scary, demanding first step God was pushing me to, and Dad did not survive the surgery, I would never have heard his love. I was so thankful I had accepted God's challenge upon me, and it has changed everything. Fourth secret of highly unsuccessful people, they make their own God. And then finally, secret number 5, take no stand. The great preacher Alexander McLaren writes, "It was not yet 6 weeks since the people had sworn, 'All that the Lord hath spoken we will do, and be obedient.' The blood of the covenant sprinkled on them was scarcely dry when they flung off all allegiance to God." In this we have to note first the people's universal revolt. The language of verse 1 may easily hide to a careless reader the gravity and the unanimity of the revolt. The people gathered themselves together, it says. Make no mistake, it was a national rebellion, a flood that swept even away some faithful, timid hearts. No voices ventured to protest. What were the elders who shortly before saw the God of Israel doing to be passive in such a crisis? Was there no one to bid the fickle multitude to look up to the summit overhead where the red flames glowed, or to remind them of the host of Egypt lying dead on the shore? Was Moses' sister herself, Miriam, cowed too, her song now forgotten? We need not cast stones at these people, for we also have short memories for either the terrible or the gracious revelations of God in our lives. But we should learn the lesson here that God's people have to set themselves dead against the rush of popular feeling, and that there are times when silence or compliance is sin. This is the fifth and final problem that led to the people's troubles. No one stood up for what was right, No one took a stand against the mob. In fact, it seems no one even attempted to take a stand. No one wanted that danger, that risk, that potential cost. A lesson, finally, of the danger whenever we allow ourselves to put our brains on autopilot and just go along with the ways of the majority rather than the ways of God. A reminder that the ways of God often demand that we go against the ways of the world. It's our final lesson here. It has been said, if you don't stand for something, you will fall for everything, right? And this is precisely what happened to the people of Israel. Basically, no one stood for anything unless they fell for everything. The point being, is this the same with us? If we want the life God offers us, then we need to stand up for the life that God offers to us, the life God calls us to. This amidst a world that generally goes otherwise. We have to be a people who stand for the ways of God. And by this, I do not mean the way it is often expressed within religious circles, which means, as going around telling other people what's wrong with them or forcing our ways upon others. No. Rather, I mean simply living lives that against the common ways of the world stand out and show a better, higher way. Lives that seek not to just exist, to just get by, to just fit in, but that seek to mean something in the world, to show and to offer the better, higher way, the way of Jesus Christ, the way of compassion and grace and sacrifice and service, right? Lives that stand for something, right? One final time, is this us? Will it be us? In closing, consider the following example. Author Van Morris, in a New York Times article entitled, "What Could You Do Without?" writes, while waiting at a traffic light with her parents in Atlanta, Georgia, Kevin and Joan Solwin's 14-year-old daughter, Hannah, saw a black Mercedes coupe on one side and a homeless man begging for food on the other. Hannah turned to her father and said, "Dad, if that man had a less nice car, that other man there could have a meal." Even as they pulled away, Hannah insisted she wanted to do something about the inequity. "What do you want to do?" her mother asked. "Sell our house," Hannah replied. And eventually that's exactly what they did. Moved by the cause of those in poverty, they sold their luxurious home, donated half the proceeds to charity, and bought a modest replacement home. Though the sacrifice was great, the benefits have been greater still. A smaller house has meant a more family-friendly house. We essentially traded stuff for togetherness and connectedness, Kevin says. Even better, the thousands of dollars they donated helped fund the Hunger Project, which works to fight poverty in Ghana, building community centers, libraries, food banks, and funding agricultural programs. The entire project is chronicled in a book entitled The Power of Half. The aim of the book isn't to get people to sell their houses, but simply to encourage them to break with the ingrained ways of our society and discover something far better, to buck the system and to find life. Says Hannah, "For us, the house was just something we could live without. It was too big. Everyone has too much of something, whether it's time, talent, or treasure. Everyone has their own half. You just have to find it. Find the higher, better calling. Change the world. Don't just live. Stand for something. If you want to succeed in life, form early on the habit of doing the things that failures do not like to do. The 5 secrets of highly unsuccessful people. Be impatient, believe the worst, never bend, make your own God, and take no stand. This week, which will it be? Failure or success? Let's join together in singing our closing hymn, number 400, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. Would you please stand?